Okay. So what we are looking at is how to create a strategy implementation plan, to develop your strategy and then plan around. Um, one thing, I just need something. So one second, just all right. So looking at the strategy implementation plan, we start with creating a vision, mission, and strategic goals. Um, so when you're creating a strategy implementation plan or an organizational strategy, you usually start with clarifying what your vision, mission, and core values are, and the strategic goals. Your mission is about the basic purpose of the organization, what it does, what it provides to society. So, for instance, provide healthcare services at a high quality to save lives, something like that, right? And it will usually have a set of behavioral guidelines or ethical guidelines, which will be your core values. Um, that's your mission statement. Your vision is more painting a picture to persuade, to win hearts and minds, to persuade people to buy into this mission, and saying, okay, in 10 years' time, this is the vision we have, this type of organization we want to see, this type of society we want to see. That will be your vision statement. While your mission statement will have your core values, and it will be about your purpose. And then you would have um, corporate objectives going from that, right? So at that level, you now need to start thinking what percentage of you want to increase your customer base by 20%, you want to increase revenue by 40%, you want to increase profit by 20% in the next 1 year, something like that. So vision, mission, and corporate objectives. Those are the things we want to see at the start of your strategy. So these are examples of um, value statements. For instance, if you look at the Starbucks, to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup of coffee, and one neighborhood at a time. Um, so they they sell the vision of the organization also. Then you now need to figure out what your strategic plan is to achieve this vision and mission, right? So some people will call it long-term plan or corporate plan. Why? Because we are normally looking at maybe around 5 years uh, time frame for your plan. 3 to 5 years. Some people do 5 to 10 years. So, what is your strategy for the next 5 years? Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages of doing strategic planning. You can read that on your own. But basically, you want to do strategic planning to ensure that you have clear objectives and a clear strategy to achieve those objectives, and win the support of stakeholders and identify the resources you need to achieve them. Right? But you don't want to do it in such a way that it becomes rigid and inflexible and bureaucratic and you cannot respond to changes. So if you are planning in this direction and then something changes in your environment, you need to be able to be flexible. Don't stick to the plan, very rigid. So you need a bit more of a flexible approach. Approach to developing the plan can be top down. That is, the senior leader and CEO can decide these are corporate objectives, these are strategy, and they now communicate down to all the layers of the organization, right? Or you can have more emergent strategy, where from the bottom up you consult people widely and they suggest ideas and you incorporate that and synthesize that. Those are the two main approaches to developing your strategy. Um, so this is a good diagram that explains the strategizing process or strategy making process. So you set your vision, mission, and values and your corporate objectives. Then you do some sort of analysis to understand your strategic position. So you analyze your external environment, both the macro environment, maybe trade, personal analysis, political, economic, the competitor external environment, your key competitors and suppliers and distributors. You also do analysis of your internal environment, your culture, your structure, what resources and capabilities and dynamic capabilities you have in your organization, your SWOT analysis. You also may decide to analyze your key stakeholders, right? To assess what suppliers, distributors, and what influences you need to take into consideration in terms of government regulation or community environmental concerns and so on, climate change and things like that. Then you generate strategic options, right? So you generate strategic options. So you can have option A, option B, option C. You can say, oh, what if we go high cost, high quality? That can be option A. Option B can be low cost, low quality. That can be option B. Option C can be new products and services. Option D can be innovation in distribution. And then you now look at all A, B, C, D, which one is the best. You evaluate your options and you choose your strategy. And then you now implement strategy. So you generate options, you choose the strategy, that's the strategic choice. You now implement the strategy. This now requires a lot of management and leadership ability, change management ability also. So we discuss change management when we do LO4 by 11 o'clock. And then you have to have some review and control to review what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve next time we do the strategy planning process. So that's a good summary, good overview of the strategic planning process. The three key areas there are strategic position analysis. So this is where you analyze your internal environment, your external environment, your stakeholders. The second thing is your strategic choices. This is where you develop your option A, B, C, D, and evaluate and then choose the option. And then the third part of the triangle is your implementation, strategy in action, when you now actually have to do it. And this may involve change management and leadership skills. So you can think of it as a triangle made up of strategic analysis or analysis of your strategic position, strategic choices, and strategy implementation or strategy in action. So we've discussed that. So this is just a diagram to illustrate what the components of each of those ends of the triangle are. So for your strategic position, you need to do your purpose, your vision, your mission statement, look at your organizational culture, that's your internal analysis and structure, environment, your external analysis, your capability, that's part of your internal analysis, dynamic capability in the previous class. Your strategic choice, what's your business level strategy, your corporate level strategy, what's your view on international expansion, internationalization, innovation, acquisition and alliances. These are all choices or options you may want to consider. Then choose strategy in action. This is where you now need to do your planning, evaluating, organizing, change management, and implementation. So, in the past, we've also talked about the difference between corporate and business level strategy. I think we mentioned that in the first session we had. At the corporate strategy, you're looking at the type of strategy you are developing there is more like your BCG matrix. Which business should you be in? Which business should you sell? Whereas at your business level strategy, the middle one, you're now looking at should you be focusing on cost or quality or innovation, something like that. And then the functional strategy is how do you support this strategy through HR. So what's your HR strategy to support through marketing? What's your marketing strategy to support things like that? Those are also the fact that when we do the strategy planning process, we can acquire those three levels. So we'll be focusing today on the business level strategy. But just a quick reminder of the corporate level strategy. A quick reminder of this corporate level strategy, and I think it's good to clarify because last session, I think there was a bit of confusion. So this is one of the examples we use when we are doing corporate level strategy. At this stage, you are saying which business should I belong to, right? The BCG growth share matrix. Um, so we'll discuss this at some point just to give some clarification. But let's talk about the business level strategy. So the business level strategy is done for what we call SBUs, strategic business units, right? So what is an SBU, right? If at the top, your corporate level, you are looking at the whole organization. Usually it's a conglomerate, so it can have like 4, 5, 6, 20 companies, right? Something like let's look at an example. I think I have an example. Yeah, let's look at Nestle, right? So globally, you have Nestle at the corporate level, and then maybe structured along 4 business lines: coffee and beverage business section, pet care, nutrition where they make all the food and snacks and cereals, and then chocolate and confectionery, right? And each of these is run as a business unit, strategic business unit with its own HR, marketing, and production and operations and factories. It's viewed as a profit center. Each of these is responsible to make profit, so we know which one is not being profitable enough, which one we can sell off, or which one we can invest more in. Right? So we consider these strategic business units. Another example, you may have a bank. A bank may have a retail bank for every customer who goes off the street and wants to save money or get a loan. It may have a stock investment branch, so you may have an investment bank. You may have a mortgage bank, right? So when you look at a bank, maybe like Barclays, it's actually made up of strategic business units. Barclays Mortgage, Barclays Finance, Barclays Investment, Barclays Wealth for high-end clients. And each of those is run almost like a mini business with its own HR, marketing, and operations and support function. Each of them has to account for a profit. So that's what we mean by strategic business units. So at that level, we also, each of those needs to have its own strategy. We don't apply the same strategy across all SBUs, no. So for instance, if you go back to the example of Nestle, the strategy for chocolate and confectionery may be high quality chocolate and confectionery, whereas the strategy for pet care may be low cost. We want to supply pet food at the lowest cost. So that's fine. So each of these SBUs, because it's accountable for its own profit and it's run like a mini business, can have a different business level strategy. And then when we talk about corporate level strategy, this is what we mean. We are trying to say which of these businesses should we invest more in, which should we sell off, which can we focus on. And that's where last week we talked about the BCG matrix. So I think it would be good to just to clarify this again. We have 2 dimensions: market share and market growth. Market growth refers to, is this market growing? For instance, if we have 1 million customers now who are buying chocolates, right? But in 10 years' time, we estimate that this market will grow to 5 million customers. That is market growth. So are you operating in a market that is growing or a market that is declining, right? So, for instance, if you are operating, if you are doing a business selling chocolate and there's evidence that it's a growing market, more people will buy chocolate, younger people buy chocolate, fine. Whereas if you are in the pet care business, it may be a declining market. Maybe as generations are growing, very fewer and fewer people are keeping dogs and cats as pets or any other pet. So we know that in 5, 10, 20 years time, that market is shrinking, declining, right? If it's especially a market that is based on older people and younger people don't do that. So if it's something high technology, yes, that's a growth market. More and more people are using it, but something that is done more manually, right? Like for instance, physical books. If fewer and fewer people are reading hard copy books, that may be a shrinking market. Market share now is your proportion of the market that your company has in terms of sales. So maybe you sell 20% or 30% of this market. So you need to consider two things. Is this market growing? Yes, we are selling chocolates, and right now it's a 1 million customer market. Very soon it will be a 10 million customer market. Good. So that is high market growth. Currently, your proportion of the market share is 20%. When it grows from 1 million customers, you are doing 20%. When it goes to 10 million customers, will you still be doing 20% of 10 million? Or can you even grow your proportion to 40%? Or will you lose the percentage of your market share? So market share is different from market growth. Market growth is the overall market growing. Market share, my proportion of that market will increase or reduce. So you can have a market that is staying the same or going down, but your market share goes up. Right? So even though fewer people are buying books, but you are selling to more of that market. And you can have a market that is growing, but your market share is remaining the same. So 10% of 1 million, and in 10 years' time, you still be 10% of 10 million. Or even declining, the market can be growing, but your proportion of the share is reducing. So that will give you the 4 boxes, and we'll discuss the 4 boxes last week. You know, and so your stars being market is growing and your share is growing. So moving from 1 million customers to 10 million customers, and then moving our percentage from 20% of the market to maybe 40%. But a question mark, this is where the market is growing, moving from 1 million customers to 10 million customers in 10 years' time, but our market share is low. We only have maybe 1% of this market, 2% of this market, and there's no evidence that we will increase our market share. That's a question mark, and so on and so forth. So just to clarify, there was a bit of misunderstanding last week. So that's your example of your corporate level strategy, and you say based on that, coffee and beverages may be a star, high market share, high market growth. We'll invest more in it. Pet care may be a dog, low market share, low market growth. Let's sell it off. No point doing this business. Let somebody else do it. Huh? Nutrition can be a cash cow, high market growth, but steady market share. It's not the market share will increase, but the market is growing. Let's milk it, maintain it and milk it, right? And so on. So you now decide which businesses to focus on investing and which to sell off. So that's your corporate level strategy. So this is the whole idea of having SBUs, right? And your SBUs can be based on customer types, products or services, competitors, and so on, right? Or even your strategic capability. Like you might have a supermarket can have an online store and a face-to-face SBU. So for instance, you can have Asda. We have Asda online. Asda is a popular supermarket in the UK, and then Asda stores. And you may find that your online business is doing very well, but your actual shops that people go in physically is not doing well because there are two different SBUs, or they may have two different strategies. So let's look now at developing a strategic plan. We talked about different approaches, top down, bottom up, and so on. But at the business level now, at the SBU level, what are the things you need to consider? So it will be things like price, differentiation, your hybrid, your focus. We'll look at that. And then how to achieve sustainable competitive advantage using things like collaboration and hyper competitive strategy and so on. So again, I think we've talked about Porter's generic strategy. We've introduced it before. So this is a quick recap. Porter said there are 3 generic strategies. You can either focus on being low-cost producer. That's your option A, and that's maybe best for your company. Or you can focus on differentiation, for instance, differentiating yourself from competitors, being the high-quality producer, something like that. Or you can have a strategy based on focusing on a niche market, a sector within the market. For instance, you want to focus on only young people, or you want to focus on only online purchases, right? So, whereas we know that a lot of people sell books, you want to focus on just online, and that's a focus strategy, online book sales. So basically, you can, option A is cost, low cost. Option B is differentiation, for instance, differentiating based on being high quality for everybody, all customers. And option C can be a focus strategy, either targeting a specific niche of the market based on cost or based on differentiation such as quality. So you have three strategies. And you can read up on that. I want to, this is an example of your competitive advantage. Again, Mercedes-Benz versus BMW. This is the kind of idea we're talking about. Do you want to focus, is your, or more a luxury and sporting image, for instance, BMW, or a more conservative image and conservative values, but also known for high quality. So this is an example of differentiation and targeting a niche market. So BMWs and Mercedes-Benz are not for everybody. They don't try to make cars for poor people, rich people, middle people. No, they just target the high-end market and then they differentiate based on their image. So that's an example of applying Porter strategy. Another good example I like is the strategy clock. So this basically builds and expands on the idea by Porter. It says 3 is not enough. Let's look at more. And similar to Michael Porter said don't try to do all three, focus on one. If not, you'll be stuck in the middle, you'll not do anywhere. Right? So don't try to be low cost and differentiation at the same time, stick to one and do it well. Or you'll be stuck in the middle and do nothing well. Jack of all trades, master of none. So similar idea to the strategy clock. So the strategy clock model by Bowman and Faulkner, so that's a reference. You have two dimensions. So one is price at the bottom, low price and high price, right? And then the other one is the perceived benefit to the customer of your product or service, high or low. And they say that gives you 8 options, and the good options that you have to choose from are 1 to 5. So number 1 is low price, low benefit. They call that a no frills strategy. And some people look, I want toilet roll. I don't really want my toilet roll to be smelling very good, perfumed with different colors. No, because at the end of the day, I'm flushing it down the toilet. So, no frills can be your strategy, right? Cheap but functional. It doesn't have any extra functionality or gadgets, right? Some people in the car market, look, they want a car that has 4 tires, a roof, and 2 seats. They don't really need a car that, has cruise control or fantastic leather seats or extra boot space, 4-wheel drive. No, all those are extra. They don't need those frills. They're using their car as a very functional object to get from point A to point B, usually from work to home, shop, and back home. That's it. Basic visit friends or supplies. So that's a no frill strategy. Option 1. Another strategic option you may choose from would be your low price strategy. So here you have a bit more functionality. You have a car, but it's low price version. But it has some functionality. It has more things. It has an air condition. It has sound system. Yeah, so on and so forth. But so when you look at your SUVs or 4-wheel drive market, you have the lower cost versions and the higher cost versions. So we are talking of lower cost version, but it has to be functional. So call that option 2, low price. Option 4, differentiation. So for instance, higher quality, it has everything, all the frills, right? It has leather seats, it has everything, right? Hybrid is option 3, somewhere in between. Some people try to do a little bit of differentiation, but not too much. But then they try to maintain the price low, not the lowest in the market, but low enough. And there are some customers that want that balance between having a bit more quality, but not going too much higher in the price. So you see a customer and say, okay, look, I know the basic cars are like basic of this product like $5,000. I'm willing to go like $1,000 or $2,000 more, but not much more than that. And so it has this. You see this especially like in the housing market. Some people say, okay, no frills. I just want a room, one bedroom. That's fine. No garden, no balcony, nothing. Right? Low cost. Oh, okay. 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. It's got a kitchen. It's got a small balcony. Fine. Hybrid. Oh, we have a garden now. You understand? It's a bit more expensive, a bit more space. It has a garden, has a garage, but it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. And then differentiation, oh, you have your swimming pool, you have everything, and you pay the money. And then option 5, this is your focus differentiation. This is where you now start targeting niche markets, either the extra wealthy or um, people that maybe have special needs, So, for instance, this is a car. What about those who are wheelchair but they want to drive? So cars with wheelchair access. What about cars with um, um, cars with people who have pets and want to carry their dog or cat? That have spaces for them and so on. So you focus on a niche aspect of the market. Option 6, 7, and 8. That is high price but low perceived benefit. Don't make sense. So if any of your business SBUs fall within a strategy that is high price but low perceived benefit, they are going to lose their business very soon because they will lose customers. So option 6, 7, and 8 says don't make sense. Right? So this is almost like an expanded version of Porter. And 6, 7, and 8, similar to Porter, don't get stuck in the middle. Don't try to do price and quality at the same time and so on and so forth. Although there's a bit of room for hybrid in this theory. So what we are saying here is, after you do in your strategy making process, you do your analysis, internal analysis, external analysis, blah blah blah. Then the next stage is strategy choice. These are the choices, and then you evaluate which choice is suitable for your business. Then you now move to the next stage, which is implementation. But before you choose, you have to know what your option A is, option B is, option C is. So that's the idea behind the strategic clock theory. Another model another theory of developing strategy is the Delta model, Hacks and Wiles too. So this one says the previous strategies have focused on competing with your rivals. So that's like war. If you think about it, like fighting a war with your rival, right? But they rather you think about strategy more in terms of love. How do you love your customer? How do you love your suppliers and distributors and get the best out of them, right? So if you can love your suppliers and distributors and get the best out of them, if you enhance your product and service, it gives you a competitive advantage. You love your customer and bond with your customer closely to the point you really know each customer is separate and distinct, and you know what each customer's unique taste and try to meet it. Then with that level of love you are showing the customer, you have loyalty, customer loyalty. Customers will spend money on you, and that's your strategy. So that's the idea of the Delta model. And so we say, for instance, there we say keep ideas there that you have to understand your customer deeply. Strategies don't one customer at a time. So customer differentiation, you have to be product centric and love your customers and suppliers, right? And people that can complement your product and collaborate with them closer. How do you help your distributors become more efficient so they can supply you your raw materials faster or cheaper or better quality? How do you put your suppliers to become more efficient? How do you work with your distributors to become more efficient? Because at the end of the day, your customer is benefit. That's the idea about this strategy. Now, sometimes in your command verbs, when you're doing your assignment, you see something like critically or assess. So what we are saying is don't just explain the three, show us the differences, compare the three strategies or two strategies. And this table gives you an idea of what we mean by critical evaluation or comparative assessment or whatever. You can see that if you look at Michael Porter's theory, the resource-based view, when we look at VRIO, variety, value, rarity, we looked at that last section or last two sessions, right? The VRIO model and the Delta model we just discussed now. You can actually compare them. They are focused on the strategy. Porter is fighting a war with your industry, your competitors. Resource-based, you look at your competitors, it just looks at the internal operation, internal business, and how you can make your capabilities, your competencies and resources more valuable, rare, and so on. Hard to copy. And while the Delta framework looks at the extended cooperation, the extended term looks at the term, but it looks at the supply chain of its customers. So that kind of thing, you can actually do a comparative analysis of each of the theories. And that's the kind of thing we are encouraging you to start learning to do for your assessment, especially when you see command verbs like critically evaluate or assess and so on. So we've looked at SBUs. What are SBUs? Corporate level strategy, and then SBUs. And then for SBUs, we looked at the strategy clock and Porter strategy and Delta model, which strategy each SBU can choose. And then let's look at some of the approaches to things like hyper competition and game theory and so on. So hyper competition simply means you may find yourself in an industry with very intensive competition and very intensive state of change in the environment. It's not stable. It's very, very competitive environment. Some industries are not that competitive. You have a few players and it's not that intense. But others, very, very competitive industries. So that's what we call hyper competition. So here, what is proposed is speed and initiative. In hyper-competitive environments, your strategy has to be based on being very fast to make changes and taking initiative, right? Not waiting to play catch-up when others take the initiative from you. And you suggest what you call the 7S, strategy. So you need to focus on superior stakeholder satisfaction, strategic soothsaying or strategic prediction. You need to be able to predict what's going to happen in the future based on new opportunities and changes. Speed, we keep on saying speed is important, speed of change. Surprise your competitors, so you need to take the initiative to be the one to be the first mover in the environment to make change, bring out that innovation. Sometimes you shift the rules of competition, for instance, by creating new business models or serving customers in new and interesting ways. Signal your strategic intent, very clear communication to everyone that this is who you are and what you're doing, and simultaneous and strategic sequential trust. So it's like a machine gun. Instead of shooting a sniper one bullet, you have a rapid series of initiatives you are going to implement at the same time. So that's the idea behind the hyper-competitive environment, strategy in a hyper-competitive environment. What you're trying to do is to block others from being first movers. You should be the first mover. Imitate others very fast if you have to, but try to create products that others cannot imitate. Things like that. Position yourself well, and then overcome barriers to entry of new products and services to your business. So it's more of a way of thinking, but if the key idea here is take the initiative. Now, another approach you may want to consider is more a cooperative approach. So a cooperative approach says, how do we cooperate with others rather than fighting a war with them all the time, right? But here, what you're looking at are things like mergers and acquisitions and strategic partnerships. So you may have a situation where you say, well, we know that BMW are good in making cars. We are good in making green technology, using green energy or whatever. So let's collaborate together to make a green car or electric car, whatever, right? So instead of us doing it all by ourselves, we may enter a strategic partnership with BMW. So you may find, for instance, or Boeing makes planes, whereas BMW makes cars. But both of them have engines, and both of them are looking for technology to make those engines more efficient but cleaner. It does not pollute the environment. Rather than spending money on their own researching these things, Boeing and BMW can collaborate to say, how do we support each other in creating engines that don't pollute the environment but are more efficient. and then you use it for your cars, we use it for our aeroplane. But we save the cost of research and development by collaboration. Others may want to merge, they may even want to merge or acquire another company to join their technology or their ideas of their market or whatever. So there are different ways you can collaborate, but think of cooperation as a strategy. Not always doing it yourself and fighting a war with your rivals. So some benefits of cooperation: you can collaborate to increase your selling power, your buying power. You can collaborate to build barriers to avoid others from coming to disrupt your business or gain entry into your business sector. Share work with your customers. That's another collaboration. So you see a lot of people doing open source and crowdsourcing. So instead of you designing your marketing campaign, for instance, you can do a competition and get customers to suggest the kind of adverts and campaigns they like to see about your product. So it's like the customer is almost working for you to share their ideas and things that are relevant to the customers that you do. So you get that marketing side, and so on. You may collaborate with government, especially where there's some grants or funding available. So government is interested in moving to a green economy, environmental friendly economy, and there's some money or resources available. So as a company, you go and say, oh, we want this grant or this tax rebate so that we can develop green things within our own business. So that's an example. You can collaborate with some government schemes and get some advantages. I think one of the last ones we'll look at here would be game theory. So this approach to strategy is, the idea is like chess. So in chess, you're supposed to think about 2, 3, 4 moves ahead, not just the next move. You move, the other person responds, you move, the other person responds. So you have to be thinking of, if I decide to do this move, either go to low cost or create a new innovative product, what's the likely response of the other person or my competitor? And then if they respond like that, what should I do? And then what may they do? Why? Because a lot of people just think, oh, I've looked at my strategies, option A, B, C, I'm choosing option A. Option A is low cost, a large low cost. Within 6 months, your customer response, your rival response, your competitor response. So you used to sell this product for $10, you dropped it to $8. Within 6 months, everything is doing well, you have stolen all the market share, customers are coming to you. Within 6 months, your competitors respond. They drop it down to $8, also may even drop it down to $7.50. But what game theory is saying is you should have anticipated this response and say, are you willing to start a price war? But if they drop to $7.50 and then you drop to $6 and then they respond again, drop to $5.50, at the end of the day, it will be difficult for anybody to make profit from that business. So think about the possible responses, like a game, and then decide what you can do as a series of moves to get the outcome you prefer. So that's the idea of game theory. So we've covered quite a lot today. We looked at the difference between business and corporate level strategy. We reminded ourselves about corporate level strategy, looking at the whole business, which business should we sell off, which should we invest in. We looked at the BCG matrix, market share, market growth. Then we looked at the business level strategy, say what is a business, strategic business unit, SBU, and then for each of these we have strategies. We looked at Michael Porter's theory of 3 strategies of cost, differentiation, and focus. We looked at the strategy clock that has a few more options beyond those 3. We looked at the Delta Max model. We looked at other models. We looked at hypercomposition, game theory, cooperative strategy, collaboration, and so on. These are all strategic options you can choose, but you have to now weigh up which one is best for your situation. Choose. Then you move to implementation. So, are there any questions? Any questions from today's topic? So after that, we've done this before, so I didn't want to go over it again. But when we talked about the VRIO, that's it. The resource-based use made of VRIO, valuable reading people and organizational support. So if you want to critically evaluate, you can critically evaluate Michael Porter, this RBV or VRIO model, and maybe the Delta Max model. And that was what was tried to show you an example of doing that here. So this slide shows you if you have to critically evaluate or compare, you can compare them. So in terms of the focus of the strategy, Michael Porter focuses on strategy to dominate your industry. Whereas the resource-based view doesn't look at your industry or competitors, it looks at just the internal organization. Whereas the Delta model framework looks at the extended enterprise. So that's the internal organization plus its distributors, suppliers, and customers. Um, so um, and then it gives you other ways to compare the three, right? So for instance, strategy for Porter's framework is based on competition rivalry, right? Whereas for real, the RBV VRO model is like real estate, it's like owning your property, making your company more valuable, right? Whereas for Delta model, Delta model is based on customer bonding and loving your customer. Those are ways to analyze. Okay. Um, if there are no questions, then we can take a break, and around 11 o'clock or thereabouts, we can come for learning outcome 4. All right, thanks.